So I think one of the most interesting things about doing research in dialectology generally, but specifically about the New York accent, the New York City dialect, is the desire in the media to get a splashy kind of takeaway in terms of that accent, because it's an accent that gets talked about a lot. It's very well known in the U.S. in relation to other accents or dialects, and it's stigmatized. So a lot of people have kind of negative ideologies about the New York accent, rightly so we associate it with The Sopranos or some sort of unsavory character. So in the media, I see a tendency for, can we get some sort of a dramatic takeaway? In my research, what I found were some reversals of changes in progress for classic New York City features. So the idea that we might use a particular vowel in New York, and that for a long time in the 20th century, we were seeing an increase in the use of that quote-unquote New York City vowel that was spreading throughout the community. More people using it more often. And in fact, what we've seen in the last 20 or 30, maybe 40 years is a reversal of that. So that if you're born and raised in New York, you're actually using less of these classic New York City features. These are the findings that I found on the Lower East Side. And these are the findings that caused the media to get very excited and say, are we losing the New York accent? Or in fact, we are losing the New York accent. New York accent on the decline. And I think that maybe the takeaway that I'd like to contribute is that it's a little bit more nuanced than that. One of the controversies that comes up in research on the New York City accent in particular that I didn't get to cover in this particular piece, but that's often talked about, is the notion of borough differences. So if you ask a native New Yorker, they will tell you that they can distinguish speakers from different regions of New York City. So they'll say, I can identify a Bronx accent versus a Staten Island accent. What's really interesting is that linguists don't think this is true. We don't have any linguistic evidence that there are any differences between sub-regions within New York City. But we can't tell New Yorkers that, or when we do, we make them very upset because they believe that this is something that they're capable of. In fact, what we think is going on is that there's some sort of stratification by socioeconomic background or something akin to that. So the notion that a more working class speaker or someone who perhaps isn't as invested in being upwardly mobile is going to have a heavier accent, right? They're going to sound more New York. But if I'm from a slightly higher class background, or for instance, what I'd really love is to get out of New York and or take on a profession where it might not be a good thing for me to have a heavy accent, I'll have a lighter accent. And there's some mapping of that distribution onto region, right? So we associate, for instance, Manhattan as a borough where we're getting less heavy New York accents. And so we think that that's what's going on with the borough controversy. But it's a very sensitive issue, particularly in the media, because the New Yorkers will fight hard for their borough differences. So I think that's another important part of the puzzle. And my research took place in Manhattan on the Lower East Side. So there certainly is a research question about whether or not some of the changes that I found in that community would hold, say, in some of the outer boroughs, or maybe in a community from one of the other regions in the city. Is it better to think of it as an evolution? I think that's absolutely right. I think, it's easy to take what we call a synchronic view of language. So we take one snapshot, one point in time, and say, wow, this is getting lost, or this is happening. And really, actually, linguistics is a diachronic, or a study of language use across time. And something that's a truth about language is that it's always changing. So yes, it's an evolution, yes. And as I said, I don't think we'll see the loss of using language to be a New Yorker, right? Or using language to be a young person, using language to be an American, right? We use language to do all sorts of things with respect to our social identities. So the finding that maybe certain things are getting lost doesn't mean that other things aren't going to come into usage and that we're not going to still be New Yorkers in some way or another.